Your brain generates over 6,000 distinct mental state transitions every single day. Scientists using advanced brain imaging discovered these patterns by tracking what they call thought worms, actual measurable neural pathways that form whenever you shift from one thought to another. Each transition takes place about 6.5 times per minute during your waking hours, creating a constant stream of mental activity happening mostly beneath your conscious awareness. But here's what those researchers didn't measure: the content of those thoughts. And that content determines whether you're programming yourself for limitation or liberation. When someone sits in a meeting thinking, "I'll never get promoted," their brain is literally carving deeper pathways of self-doubt. Meanwhile, the person next to them thinking, "How can I contribute more value?" is strengthening neural networks associated with problem-solving and opportunity recognition. This isn't positive thinking fluff. When neuroscientists examined people's brains while they engaged in different types of internal dialogue, they discovered something remarkable. Silent inner conversation, the kind where you actually talk to yourself rather than just thinking, activates both language centers and social cognition networks spanning both brain hemispheres. Your brain treats self-talk as a real social interaction, which means you're literally in conversation with the most influential person in your life every single day. Right now, someone reading this is unconsciously repeating a phrase that's destroying their potential. Maybe it's, "I always mess up presentations," or "I'm not smart enough for this." Every time you think these words, your brain releases dopamine. Not because the thought feels good, but because it's familiar. Your neural networks are rewarded for following well-worn pathways of limitation. A groundbreaking study tracked 600 people who consciously changed their internal language patterns. Within 12 weeks, those who practiced specific linguistic reframing techniques showed a 68% improvement in emotional intelligence and a 57% increase in academic achievement. The researchers discovered that participants' brains literally restructured themselves, creating new neural highways where old limiting patterns once dominated. The most powerful discovery came from brain imaging studies using fMRI technology. When people say, "I can't handle this situation," their prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for executive function and creative problem solving, shows immediate decreased activity. However, when the same person asks, "How can I approach this differently?" multiple brain regions associated with creativity, memory, and strategic thinking activate within seconds. Think about that for a moment. Two simple word changes create measurably different brain states. The phrase "I can't" literally dims your problem-solving capacity, while "how can I" illuminates multiple neural networks simultaneously. This isn't motivational speaking. This is measurable neuroscience happening in real time inside your skull. Research involving adults who listened to positive affirmations in their own voice versus others' voices revealed that hearing your own voice activates deeper self-referential processing networks and episodic memory systems. Self-delivered positive programming proved up to 40% more effective than external sources. Your brain trusts your own voice more than any outside authority, making your internal dialogue the most powerful tool for neural transformation. One study followed participants through intensive reframing practice. Brain scans revealed that within just 15 minutes of focused self-talk training, new neural connections began forming. By week 8, participants showed increased gray matter density in areas associated with emotional regulation and self-referential processing. Most remarkably, they reported that positive thoughts went from requiring conscious effort to occurring automatically. If you've ever experienced a moment where negative self-talk suddenly seemed ridiculous and empowering, thoughts felt natural, hit the like button. You've witnessed neuroplasticity in action. Your limiting beliefs aren't character defects. They're neurological artifacts created by 3 distinct brain systems working in primitive ways. The reptilian brain governs survival and creates unknown equals danger responses. The limbic system processes emotional memories and associations. The neocortex handles rational thinking, but honestly, it often rationalizes existing beliefs rather than challenging them. Here's something most people don't know. Chronic procrastinators have measurably larger amygdalas, the brain's threat detection center, which creates hesitation and avoidance when facing challenging tasks. Brain scans show that people who consistently delay important actions have weaker connections between the anterior prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning, and areas that control emotional impulses. Their brains literally interpret challenging tasks as threats requiring avoidance rather than opportunities for growth. But neuroplasticity research offers profound hope. Studies demonstrate that specific visualization and reframing exercises can actually shrink amygdala volume while strengthening prefrontal cortex connections within 6 to 8 weeks of consistent practice. Adults who engaged in targeted mental training showed structural brain changes comparable to, learning a new language or musical instrument. The timeline matters. Research tracking neuroplastic change reveals consistent patterns. Initial changes occur within hours of focused practice, structural modifications appear within 2 to 3 weeks, and lasting transformation typically consolidates within 8 to 12 weeks. Harvard studies documented measurable brain changes after just 8 weeks of mindfulness training, with participants showing increased gray matter in the hippocampus, which is involved in memory and learning, and decreased amygdala reactivity, which is related to stress response. Consider the implications. Every negative thought pattern dominating your internal dialogue right now could be measurably different in 2 months. Every limiting belief constraining your actions could be neurologically obsolete by the end of this year. The question isn't whether your brain can change. It's whether you'll direct that change consciously or let it happen by default. Most people don't realize that negative self-talk creates robust neural networks through dopamine release. Your brain actually rewards familiar thought patterns, even destructive ones, because prediction equals survival. Every time you think, "I'm not good enough," your neural pathways strengthen that belief, making it feel increasingly true and automatic. However, when adults practice specific reframing techniques, their brains begin forming new neural connections within 15 minutes of focused effort. One remarkable study used brain imaging to track people learning to replace limiting thoughts with empowering alternatives. Within 8 weeks, participants showed measurable increases in prefrontal cortex density and improved connectivity between areas controlling emotional regulation and rational thinking. Anchoring represents one of the most scientifically validated methods for creating emotional states on demand. Research demonstrates that when you experience intense positive emotion while applying a specific sensory cue, a touch, sound, or visual trigger, your brain forms powerful neural associations through the same rapid conditioning mechanisms that create phobias. A clinical study involving 50 participants with severe MRI-related anxiety found that 76% successfully completed their scans after NLP anchoring interventions. Participants who initially experienced panic attacks in medical scanning environments were able to access calm, confident states within minutes using anchored techniques. Brain scans showed these anchors could be triggered weeks later, with 85% effectiveness in recreating the original emotional state. Reframing works by literally changing neural firing patterns associated with memories and experiences. Multiple research studies examining cognitive restructuring across various conditions, depression, anxiety, PTSD, demonstrate moderate to strong positive correlations between reframing techniques and measurable therapeutic outcomes. When people learn to consciously alter the meaning of events, brain regions associated with emotional regulation show improved function within weeks of practice. The neurological basis of rapport building has been revolutionized by mirror neuron research. These specialized neurons fire both when we perform actions and when we observe others performing identical actions. Studies show people with higher mirror neuron activity demonstrate superior empathy, emotional intelligence, and social connection abilities. A study involving children found that activity in mirror neuron regions, particularly the inferior frontal gyrus, correlated significantly with empathy scores and interpersonal competence ratings. When participants observed emotional expressions, greater mirror neuron activity predicted better social functioning. NLP Rapport techniques work by deliberately activating these mirror neuron systems through matching breathing, posture, and speech patterns, creating unconscious feelings of connection and trust. Public speaking anxiety affects 75 to 77% of the population. That's over 200 million people experiencing measurable fear around communication. Traditional advice focuses on conscious preparation, but that only addresses the 5% of mental processing happening at the awareness level. The real terror lives in the unconscious 95% of brain activity. A recent study with university students found that 61% had never heard of NLP techniques for public speaking. After learning just 7 specific methods, including anchoring confident states, positive gesturing, and sensory-based language patterns, participants showed dramatic improvements. 57% reported significant reductions in heart rate elevation, 48% experienced less mental blankness, and 42% reduced stammering during presentations. Most remarkably, participants described that NLP cleared their thoughts and considerably increased presentation skills after brief training sessions. This makes scientific sense. When someone with public speaking anxiety thinks about presenting, their amygdala activates threat detection responses while the prefrontal cortex shows decreased activity. NLP techniques work by anchoring resourceful emotional states and reframing the presentation context, literally changing which neural networks dominate during speaking situations. Procrastination research reveals that chronic delaying behavior strengthens neural pathways associated with avoidance while weakening discipline and focus pathways. Brain scans show reduced gray matter in the prefrontal cortex among chronic procrastinators, affecting decision-making and impulse control. The good news? Neuroplasticity interventions using visualization and goal-setting techniques can reverse these changes within weeks of consistent practice. One study identified that procrastination occurs when the anterior prefrontal cortex loses control over the default mode network, and hyperactivity in emotional processing regions overrides areas responsible for inhibiting distracting stimuli. NLP visualization techniques and reframing exercises directly target these neural patterns, strengthening prefrontal control while reducing limbic reactivity. Emotional intelligence training using NLP principles, really demonstrates that consistent practice literally reconstructs neural networks. The anterior cingulate cortex becomes more active, while the prefrontal cortex develops stronger regulatory control over the amygdala. A comprehensive study showed that participants trained in specific NLP emotional regulation techniques achieved a 68% improvement in emotional intelligence scores, but only when training involved deliberate practice rather than just generic empathy exercises. The science actually reveals pretty precise patterns for neuroplastic change. Initial modifications occur within just a few hours of focused practice. Structural brain alterations appear within 2 to 3 weeks. Lasting transformation, though, typically consolidates within 8 to 12 weeks of consistent application. And Harvard's landmark study documented measurable brain changes after just 8 weeks of mindfulness training, with participants showing increased gray matter in regions associated with learning, memory, and emotional regulation. But here's what really matters most: the quality and consistency of practice, not just the time invested. Studies show that distributed practice, brief frequent sessions, create stronger neural pathways than massed practice, which is long infrequent sessions. Even 5 to 10 minutes of daily anchoring, reframing, or visualization can produce measurable brain changes within just a few weeks. So research tracking neuroplasticity throughout the lifespan reveals some really encouraging news. While younger brains show rapid, but sometimes unstable changes, mature brains demonstrate slower but more stable neuroplastic modifications. Interestingly, older brains actually show enhanced plasticity in some areas, although with different regulatory patterns. The important thing is, regardless of your age, your brain remains capable of profound transformation. The most successful practitioners, integrate NLP techniques into their daily routines rather than just treating them as occasional tools. This actually creates what neuroscientists call experience-dependent plasticity. Basically, your brain continuously reshapes itself based on repeated mental and physical activities. Every thought you choose, every internal dialogue you engage in, every emotional state you anchor becomes a neurological vote for the person you're becoming. So, for example, there was one woman in her 60s who was totally convinced she was too old to change. She began practicing daily reframing exercises. And within just 8 weeks, brain scans showed increased activity in her prefrontal cortex, plus improved connectivity between regions that control emotional regulation and rational thinking. She actually reported that decades of negative self-talk patterns simply stopped occurring, and they were replaced by automatic positive internal dialogue. Consider this. You're going to think over 6,000 thoughts today, no matter what. You're going to engage in internal dialogue whether you're conscious of it or not. The real question is whether those thoughts will strengthen neural pathways of limitation or liberation. Whether your brain will wire itself for fear or for confidence. Whether your internal operating system will run programs of possibility or restriction. The tools exist. The research is clear. The timeline is predictable. Your brain is honestly just waiting to be consciously programmed for success rather than accidentally conditioned for struggle. Every moment you spend reading this, your neural networks are already changing. The question isn't whether transformation is possible. It's whether you'll take conscious control of the process, or just let it happen by default. If this resonates with the part of you that knows transformation is not just possible, but inevitable, then go ahead and share this with someone who needs to reclaim control of their mental programming. Subscribe to Universal Insights, so you can keep exploring the scientific mechanisms that govern human consciousness and potential. And hey, tell me in the comments, which limiting belief pattern are you ready to neurologically reprogram using these research-backed techniques? Your transformation story could actually provide the neurological inspiration thousands of others need to begin their own journey of conscious brain change. The science has spoken. Your brain is listening. The only question remaining is, what instructions will you